What's up, guys? I'm Amber. Welcome to the Courageous Church.
And I'm Deborah. We want to share a couple things that are happening around here.
Today is one of our favorite days of the month. It's Baptism Sunday. Baptism is important because it's a public declaration that we have accepted Jesus and are turning our back on our old life and are now trusting Jesus as we move forward.
We love celebrating around here. So if you want to make the decision to get baptized today, we want to celebrate with you. All you need to do is sign up after any worship experience. At South, go to the Orange Room, and at North, to the patio. We'll have everything you need.
Here at TCC, we are passionate about serving people in our community. That's why we've decided to partner with the organization Ambassadors for Children, whose mission focuses on providing new clothing for foster families. They will be bringing their donation truck in 2 weeks. We need your help to stuff the truck.
On your way out, you'll notice a bag on your windshield. It will have all the instructions for this amazing project. Make sure to fill the bag with the items and bring them back with you in 2 weeks.
Oh, and speaking of missions, our missions team is going back to the Dominican Republic next summer. If you're interested in joining, you can go online for more information.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. Let us know if we can help you out with anything while you're here.
We hope you have a great weekend.
Good morning, Courageous. Good morning. Like Megan said, my name is Brandon, and I am so excited to be here with you guys. Pastor Tyler is out of town this week, and he has graciously allowed me to share his platform this morning and share with you guys. And so I'm super excited and honored and humbled to be with you guys this morning. So we are week 2 into unnecessary roughness. And we're talking about being kind and being gentle and tender and all of those wonderful words. And so we're going to hop right into this, all right? All right, so our series verse comes from the book of Ephesians. It's chapter 4. Verse 32, and this is Paul writing, and Paul is talking to both the churched people and the unchurched people. So Jesus had walked the earth, he had lived and died on the cross, and so Paul was writing to people trying to help them to learn more about how to live for Jesus. Okay, and so that's where we pick up for our series verse. And it starts off with this word, instead. Okay? Instead, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another just as though Christ has forgiven you. And so I think basically what Paul is saying is be like Jesus. Right? As much as you can, be like Jesus. And so I think if that's what Paul is saying in this verse, then I think it's appropriate today that we spend a little bit of time looking at the life of Jesus. And not just any part of his life, but I really want us to look today at the part of Jesus' life where I feel like he was probably in a whole lot of pressure, where it was like really weighing on him, and he probably had every right to be a little rough with people, to see how he handled that time in his life. So the thing I love about Jesus is that when Jesus walked the earth, Jesus had a small group, right? All right? Jesus had 12 guys who he hung out with, and I like to call them the Dirty Dozen, because we like cool, hip, small group names here at the Courageous Church. And these are just a bunch of regular guys, right? They didn't go through Church 101. They didn't know like all the protocol of what Jesus was teaching them as he was living with them. These were people who Jesus just chose to be with him, and he chose to immerse himself in their life. Which lets me know, here we go, no matter what mess you are in, Jesus still wants to be in your life. Okay? No matter what mess you're in, Jesus still longs to be in a relationship with you. All right, so we're going to pick up where Jesus was just finishing some time in the garden. So he was praying in the garden in Gethsemane. Okay, and so this was shortly before he was going to make the journey to the cross. And so that's where we're going to pick up in Matthew chapter 26, starting at verse 47. So Jesus had just got finished praying and was in the conversation with his small group, and he says this: while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him, with Judas, was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests of the elders of the people. Now, the betrayer, Judas, had arranged a signal with them. Look, the one that I kissed, that's the man, arrest him. And so, going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Hey, Jesus, he gave him some dab, kissed him on the cheek. Hey, Jesus. And I love Jesus' response to Judas. Jesus replied, hey, do what you came for. Like, I know who you are. I know why you are here. Do what you came for, friend. So the men stepped forward, they seized Jesus, and they arrested him. And with that, one of Jesus' companions, so another guy from the small group that Jesus used to hang out with, reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And then Jesus responds, put your sword back in its place. Jesus said to him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. All right, so Pastor Tyler opened up this series last week talking about impulse control. And so I want to connect us back to that this week. And so my message for us today is that there is strength in your restraint. Okay? There is strength in your ability to have self-restraint. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at work, and they needed to take a picture of me. How wonderful of them. So they wanted to take a picture of me, but we had to do it outside, and it was cold. It was in the 50s, and that's really cold to me because I couldn't have on a jacket. And so we were standing outside, and we were kind of walking around trying to find a spot for the picture. And so I'm shivering as we're standing outside, and then they say, okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. And so then I look normal. And then I do this thing back and forth because I don't do cold. I'm from the South where there's two temperatures. There's hot, and then there's Hades, and somewhere in between there is warm, if you are lucky. And so I remember being at my grandmother's house growing up. She had an old kind of wooden shotgun-style house, and there was no central AC in the house, and it was all window units in certain rooms. Not all rooms even had the window units. And so I can remember in the summertime we would be at her house hanging out in the living room, and that AC unit would be running. Like smoke would be coming out, and it'd still be hot in the living room. And so we would be running in and out of the door, and she had a screen door, and every now and then the screen door, it would break because it had a little spring on it, and so it wouldn't have like the tension right on it. And so we would run out and the door would swing open, and she would be sitting in a rocking chair and a recliner chair. Hey, close my door! And we'd run away further away. And so then one of her daughters, one of my aunts would come and then stand in the doorway in arm's reach of the door to yell at us, hey, Bo, they used to call me Bo, hey, Bo, come close that door. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, you can't put your arm out and close the door. Do I really need to come all the way back and close the door? And I love thinking about that time when my grandmother, she's passed away now, but I love thinking about that time that we spent together because I feel like I always learn so much just from kind of her stories and the way that she used to act. And so when I think about this story and I think about us having self-restraint, the way I connect that is that the thing about power, no matter what kind of power it is, it's only good and useful when it's kept in the place that it was designed to be in. Right? You think about an electrical line, when it's in place, it's solid, it's good, right? It's restrained, power is moving, but once it snaps, it's actually almost dangerous. Like, it almost becomes a fire hazard, because then you just got this power, and it's just flying all over the place. It's not being directed into the place that it was actually designed and purposed to be in. So, here's what I want us to get. We don't have to do and say everything that we feel. Right? Like, we don't have to do and say everything that feel. And so why is that so difficult? Like, why is that so hard? Right? Fall is here. Thanksgiving's almost here. That's crazy because Christmas is up. But I'm excited, but not necessarily for the turkey or for the parade. But I am excited for the auntie, uncle, sister, dad, brother, cousin-in-law, whoever it is in your family, fight, right? Because you know it's coming, right? And it might be with you, right? And they know your buttons, you know their buttons, and ahead of time you try to get yourself straight, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to go there. But if they do, and like you start preparing yourself for how you're going to respond in the first place, right? But look, once we just kind of let it go, like that. It's like sitting at the table with your plate, and you got your gravy boat, and you got your turkey and your mashed potatoes, and you want to put some gravy on your turkey, and you start pouring it, but then like you start talking and doing something else, and then you got the gravy on the turkey, and on the mashed potatoes, and on the rolls, and on the cranberry sauce, and on the sweet potatoes, and before you know, you're like, shoot, and then like you're trying to put it back in the bowl, but you can't really get it back in the bowl because it's touching everything now, and nobody really wants your secondhand gravy anyway. But that's how words are, right? Once your words are out, you can't really put them back in the place where they really belong. And if I had to be honest, probably some of us are walking around carrying and personifying words that we've been called that aren't really who we are. So, one of my favorite poets is Maya Angelou. She has a great way with words. She was an American poet. She had like 50 honorary degrees. She wrote like 8 autobiographies. This is what she had to say about words. And if you know who she is and you've heard her speak before, you'll think my imitation of her is funny. If you have not, then just listen and you'll get something from it, I promise. Words are things, I'm convinced. You must be careful about the words you use, or the words you allow to be used in your house. In the Old Testament, we are told in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's in Genesis. Words are things we must be careful calling people out of their names, using racial petulatives and sexual petulatives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday, we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. I think they get on your walls. They get in your wallpaper, in your upholstery, in your rugs, in your clothes. And finally, they get into you. Like, this is real talk, right? Right? This is real talk. Words get into you. And so anybody ever feel like they have like split personality disorder? Like you don't know who you are sometimes? Like if you are Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, right? If you are, for my saved people, if you are John Wesley or if you're John Wayne, like who are you today, right? I know sometimes like my wife doesn't really know who I am. We had a couple friends over at the house a couple weeks ago. We were just hanging out, and I said something just rolled out of my mouth. And after they left, she said, "Where did that come from? Why'd you say that?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't know where it came from." Because once upon a time, it was nothing for me to just use my words frivolously. And every now and then, sometimes my words just kind of come out when they shouldn't. And I'm better at it now, but if I had to be honest, I'm still not as edifying as I could be with my words. And as a matter of fact, if you really know me and hang out with me, you know I like to get a little edgy and like kind of push buttons a little bit. I actually enjoy it, but I have to check myself, right? And I have to check myself when I mess up as well, and I have to hold myself accountable. And here's the thing, when you mess up, you can't wallow in your mess up, because when you do, you are undermining the grace of Jesus, right? If Jesus went to the cross for you, why are you wallowing when you mess up? That's what the cross was for. That's what his blood was shed for. And so this is what I want us all to understand. This journey is about progress, not about being perfect. Okay, and that's why ongoing prayer is so important. I love the phrase Pastor Tyler coined in our frequency series that prayer is progress, period. Right? Prayer is progress, period, because the struggle is real, right? And the struggle is normal. It's normal. Look, I want to read with you something that Paul wrote in the book of Romans. So Paul wrote a lot of the New Testament. And I want you to read, because he was talking about himself in this excerpt I'm going to read. So it's from Romans 7:15. And listen, this is the guy writing the Bible here. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. And instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I'm doing is wrong, that shows that I agree that the law is good. So I'm not the one doing wrong. It's the sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing really good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. And I want to do what is right, but I can't. And I want to do what is good, but I don't. And I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing wrong. It's the sin living in me that's doing it. Y'all, who is this dude? Right? All right? But this is the guy that God used to write the Bible. Right? So watch what he says in verse 21. I have discovered this principle in life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind, and this power makes me a slave to the sin that is within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? And here's the answer. Verse 25. Thank God the answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. So you see how it is in my mind. I really want to obey God's law, but because of my sinful nature, I am a slave to sin. And here's the wonder of Jesus. We're all a mess, but he still accepts us anyway. Right? We all, like Paul, have this battlefield going around in our mind. Like we make the decision that we want to live for Jesus, but because we've been out of that relationship for so long, for every good thought that we have 5 other thoughts pulling us back in the other direction. And so this tug of war, this battlefield in our heads. So I think it's important for us to really look at Jesus' life, because I think there's a lot we can learn from the story that we opened up with. So there's 2 key people I want us to look at today. And there's 2 different ways that they use the strength of their power. And interestingly enough, this particular story that we opened up with about the guy cutting off the ear, it's in all 4 books of the Bible that open up the New Testament. So it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I really like it in Matthew and John because those guys were actually in Jesus' small group. They were one of the 12 disciples. And so when you read what they wrote, it's actually firsthand account of the story. Okay, so let's look at Matthew chapter 26, verse 50. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now, here's what I think we can tell about Matthew, especially if you read some of his other writings. Matthew was pretty much a peacekeeper. He liked to keep the peace because Matthew was there, but for some reason, Matthew didn't feel like giving us any details. He didn't tell us who it was. He didn't tell us whose ear it was, who did the cutting, none of that, because that was Matthew's style. He was a peacekeeper. He just kind of told, objectified exactly what happened, didn't really want to call anybody out. But John, I love John. John, on the other hand, the thing you got to know a little bit about John, John had a little bit of character issue, okay? There's even some accounts in the Bible where John refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. That ain't arrogant. I don't know what is, okay? So John had a little bit of some character issues, and this is what he wrote. So John 18:10, talking about the same account that happened. So then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest servant, cutting off his right ear, and the servant's name was Malchus. That's what John said. Yep, Malchus rolled up on Jesus, and Simon Peter was there, and he went to swing a sword, and he cut off the dude's right ear. John told it all. So why do I look at Matthew and John? First, because John lets us know it was Peter, and I really want us to look at Peter this morning. But second of all, I really want to drive this home. These were normal people that Jesus hung out with, okay? Nothing about you surprises Jesus. Nothing about you can keep Jesus away from being in a relationship with you, okay? We got to get that. So let's look at Peter. So when Peter got angry, it was very clear that he completely lost all self-control and restraint with what he needed to be doing because, think about it, y'all, If I'm going to pull out my sword and I'm going to fight for my boy, you think I'm just going to cut off somebody's ear? No, not at all. He knew how to use the sword, but because he used the power of his sword outside of the place that it was supposed to be, he lost control. And he lost aim. So instead of actually being able to use the thing that was supposed to serve one purpose, he lost his control because it wasn't supposed to be used right then anyway, and he ended up just cutting off his ear instead of actually killing him. So you have to watch the power that God gives you and channel it into the purpose that it was actually designed for. Because watch what Jesus says in verse 52, when he cuts off the ear. Jesus says this, hey, put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Okay? And this is the flag on the play of unnecessary roughness, right? Put your sword back in its place, right? You draw the sword, you die by the sword. You live in these streets, you die in these streets, right? That's what Jesus was basically saying here. So remember I said there were two people. And if we look at Paul, the only other person there is Jesus. So we have to also look at Jesus here, okay? And so we all know a little bit about Jesus. Pretty much everybody knows that he is the Son of God, right? Which probably makes him really powerful, right? He probably has a lot of power. But Jesus was also a really interesting guy because he got these 12 people to follow him and never really gave like a dissertation as to who he was to get them to actually follow him. There was something attractive about Jesus, okay? There was something attractive about the way he handled situations and the way he talked to people. So watch what he says in verse 53 after he calls the flag. Do you not think I can call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal 12 legions of angels? Paul, put your little sword up. Right? Do you not think I have at my disposal 12 legions of angels? Like I'm God's son. And that word legion is actually a Roman military term that talks about soldiers. It actually represents 6,000 soldiers. So if you do the math, 12 times 6,000, Jesus had access to 72,000 angels. It could have been so lit if Jesus wanted it to be. But he didn't. So why should we have restraint? Well, number one, Jesus had self-restraint. Because watch this. If he would have unleashed the angels then, it would have kept him from fulfilling the truth of the gospel and the justification of our sins, and he would have never made it to the journey on the cross. They would have never arrested him if he would have used his power to kill them in that moment. So here's the other thing about Jesus. Not only was he the Son of God, but he was also the Son of man. Okay? He was fully God, and he was also fully man. So why is that important? Well, it's very likely he was feeling the same pressure and rage that Peter was feeling. But Jesus was holy, yet human. And in that moment, his holiness had to step up and trump his humanity. His humility had to take precedence in the situation. And I hear you, well, duh, that's just Jesus. I mean, that's easy for him. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Because remember, I told you right before this situation, he was in the garden praying. And that Garden of Gethsemane section of the scripture is one of my favorite when you look at Jesus because it really shows his struggle with life the way that we did. So what is happening in the garden is that he's praying and he goes to his disciples. He's like, hey, stay right here. I'm just going to go over here and pray. Don't fall asleep. He goes and he starts praying and then he comes back and they fell asleep. And so he wakes them up. He's like, hey, I'm just going over right here to pray. Just stay right here. Wake up. Just kind of pray over here. I'm going over here and pray. And he goes and do it. And he prays and he comes back. And they sleep again. And so he's doing this. This happens 3 times. And Luke writes, when Jesus went to pray, that last time he was praying and he was crying and he was sweating. And the pressure was so great that his sweat glands burst. And he was bleeding sweat and crying all at the same time while he was praying. So he had pressure in his life. You can't say that it wasn't hard for him. He was praying, Father, take this cup away from me. But watch Matthew 26:39. Watch what he says. Yet, somebody say, yet, I want your will to be done, not my will. And so Jesus was showing us something key, is that when you keep your power in its place, even when you're under pressure, you're reserving it and making it accessible later for the purpose God really has designed your power for in the first place. Because the measure of your power is all in your ability to resist being provoked. Because if I can get to you, like if he can get you to go out on a date with another dude, or if she can get you to lash out, or if they can get you to give them a good north side cussing out, then my ability to provoke you has now made you lose control of your power, and your strength is nowhere to be seen. And when your strength has lost its restraint, it no longer serves its purpose. And none of us will ever be held accountable for what people do to us, only how we respond to them. So point number 2, if you are out of control, you can't be under God's control. Can't be under God's control. Pastor Tyler shared Proverbs 14:17 last week. Short-tempered people do foolish things. Right? The longer your fuse, the more you can be used. So the shorter your temper, the shorter your fuse. The more difficult you become to bless because you run out of wick. You run out of wick. And the precursor to the manifestation of the blessing on your life all resides in being self-restrained. Because here's the thing, when you decide you're going to live for Jesus and you're going to do this self and you're going to position yourself to receive the blessings of God, you basically become a stick of dynamite and a fireworks stand right outside a gas station. Right? It's a good time when you go and everything's right in place, but one wrong spark in the wrong place and everything's on fire, and it is a show, and people are going to line up to see it, right? And this is where the misperception is with the church and Christianity and living for Jesus. Somehow we got this idea that when you get saved and you start living for Jesus, that it's all an instant, easy life, and that's not how it is at all. Once you become a Christian, you instantly have access to a bloodstained cross, and you receive grace and you receive mercy. But life doesn't necessarily get any easier. You just now have somebody on your side who loves you and forgives you and empathizes with you because Jesus, has had the same hurt and the same pain and the same rejection. And then you connect yourself to a church and you get a family and a community of other people, but then still some are hurt, some are broken, some are healed, some are like 92.4% saved, and some are 3% saved. But that's just the way it goes. Everybody's on the same path, which is living for Jesus. So we got to have self-restraint. We got to want self-restraint. We got to practice it. Listen, have you ever tried to give 2 people authority over the same task, but they both have different motives? That's in essence what it looks like to lose control over a situation, right? Like you show up at Thanksgiving, you prayed, and then Uncle Jimmy comes, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm sorry, Jesus, I'm going to get this. I got this, right? You're giving 2 people control. Like, who's going to do this? So how do we make all of this work? Well, one of the keys is that we have to manage our emotions. We can't let our emotions manipulate us. Because emotions are not courteous, okay? Emotions are not courteous. They will make a mess of your life, and they will do whatever you let them do. So we have to manage that thing, and it starts with knowing our triggers, right? It starts with knowing our triggers, and I'm doing a pretty good job with mine, but the more I connect with Jesus and submit my life to him and we hang out, the easier it gets for me, and the sooner that self-awareness actually starts to sit in, which is really just the Holy Spirit living inside of me. And this is how I know it's working for me. So growing up, I've always been in church. I always loved Jesus. But my mouth didn't always know how to express that the same way. And when I grew up, we didn't really have, in the Midwest, y'all have like church cuss words, like, oh, snickerdoodles, oh, fiddlesticks, gosh darn it, rabbit. And not quite where I grew up. I have to watch my triggers, so I use the right words a lot of times. And, a couple semesters ago, I was in my small group, and we had all really got to know each other. So I felt vulnerable that I could share some of my, stories that weren't so great with them. And so I shared with them the story of me going canoeing in 7th grade and how awful it was and how things came out of my mouth that probably should not have come out and how it just was not a good situation. And as loving as they are, from that moment on, they felt imperative to get me back out in a boat on the water. So 3 semesters later, a couple of the guys and their wives hoodwinked me, and for some reason, I decided to let them take me out to the ocean, which is Lake Springfield. And immediately when this idea came up, I had to start checking my triggers because I was a little worried how things were going to end up once we got out there. So put the picture up there of me in the kayak. So this is me in the kayak, and y'all laughing. I heard you laughing. Do not laugh at my clothes, okay? Do not laugh at my clothes because my small group knew I am allergic to the sun. I could have died out there, okay? I was in head-to-toe clothing, okay? And those are not Megan's leggings. I like to ride bikes, and those are my biking pants, okay? And yes, I had on shoes because if I had on flip-flops, then my feet would swell up because I'm allergic to the sun, okay? So I'm allergic to the sun, but that didn't stop me. I can't swim, number 2, okay? Can't swim, so they was like, oh, we give you a life jacket. It's all good. I'm like, okay. So I put on a life jacket, and as a matter of fact, they even bought me a book on how to do this thing, canoeing and paddling, right? They bought me a book on how to make this all happen. Put up the next picture. I want to show you what they did to me. See way back there, those 3 canoes all the way in the back? That's them. That's them. They left me. They left me in the canoe. But long story short, I actually almost liked it. Yeah, I almost liked it. It was a good time. And I said all that to say, it could not have been a good time, okay? If I didn't manage my triggers ahead of time and watch my emotions ahead of time, I love this church. It would have been really bad if the worship leader of the church would have went off and said a whole bunch of stuff and other people would have heard in the middle of Lake Springfield. But because I knew that was my trigger, ahead of time I had to purpose it in my heart that I was not going to be impulsive and just say anything that I wanted to and let it fly out of my mouth. So we have to purpose it in our hearts after we identify what our triggers are. Anybody ever been in that rage-like moment? It's like slow motion, like you see it happening? Because if you've been there, then you probably know your triggers, right? Some people, it's a person. From husbands, it could be your kids, could be your boss, wives, just your kids because your husbands are perfect. We all know that. So, but it could be a song. It could be an environment, right? It could be an insecurity, right? It could be the fact maybe that God is stretching you and it's a growing pain. And so because that hurts when people step on that trigger, all of a sudden you blow off, but they had nothing to do with the fact that God is working on you. So we have to plan out that obedience in our heart. That's what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians. So what does this look like? What does this look like? Well, we have to admit that we're struggling, right? I love what Pastor Tyler always says. We have to get real with God so we can get right with God. Right? Last week he said probably one of my favorite phrases because it was a little, sin makes you stupid. Right? Sin makes you stupid. And we have to be honest with ourselves and know that we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. We got to have self-restraint. But we can't just have it. We got to want it. We have to want to be more like Jesus. Remember verse 53 when Jesus was talking about the legions of angels coming in front of him? Watch what he says in verse 54. But how then, Peter, would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? Right? So this is Jesus with a challenge flag, right? He calls him out, put your sword in this place. Then he says, hey, how would the scriptures be fulfilled if it went down like this? And he was referencing the cross. He was referencing what was before him, the prophetic scriptures. Basically, he was saying, Peter, if it goes down like this, if you just kill this dude with a sword, ain't nobody going to heaven. Look, that situation you are in, it is so much bigger than what you think you see. The power that God has given you is connected to so much more than you think you see right now. And Jesus has given us the example. He died on the cross and he had every bit of power to come down. But if he would have came down, his power could not have been used for the purpose of saving you. I want to pray for us today. For every person that's here and has felt the weight of life and they feel like they don't have any control. The Bible tells us that God has made a way of escape through every bit of temptation. And that way of escape is really just Jesus. It's the Holy Spirit living within us.